Each year, we've begun with professors and staff from the campus, particularly people who aren't themselves poets, reading poems that have mattered to them. It's almost always a magical occasion and a surprise. It always sends me back to poets I haven't read. This place is full of extraordinarily gifted people, as you all know, teachers, staff members, and we're going to get to hear some of them now. And because we have just this hour, I'll jump right in. Our first reader is Jocelyne Guilbault. She's a professor in both the music department and in African American studies. Her area of research is ethnomusicology, particularly the music of the West Indies, a topic she has written books and numerous journal articles about. She comes from Montreal. She's fluent in both French and Creole. Her reputation as a teacher goes shooting through all of my students who were very excited when they heard that she was going to read. She must be a knockout in the classroom. Please welcome Jocelyne.
Thank you very much for this very warm introduction. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. I also want to apologize to my colleagues for having to leave shortly after I read, because I teach at 12:30 a very big class. I chose a poem from a poet from St. Lucia, Kendall Hippolyte. Not only because I have lived in St. Lucia for many years, but also because Kendall Hippolyte is reputed as one of the most important poets of his generation, following that of Derek Walcott. I also chose this poem that is called The Muse's Complaint for several reasons. Because it's very simple on the one hand, but also because it offers a powerful critique of the colonial legacy in the West Indies. It also speaks very loudly about the importance of music, sound, and rhythm in relation to issues of identity. And lastly, but not least, it really shows how much children can remind us of how we were, and also still can be. So here is the poem, The Muse's Complaint. Albertina say, I want some other rhythm. This one can't make me break away. And I'm tired of dancing waltzes. Look there. You see them children? If I only could I rock like they rock, and then they back and jerk like them, you know, I would have free up me mind. It's such a long time I won't feel like myself again. Some other rhythm, some other rhythm. I don't want to tell lies, just the truth as it is. Whether all right with me, but I can't hear it right. Some other rhythm, some other rhythm. Albertina, Albertina say, I want some other rhythm, because this one too light. Then make it too tight. It not free, it ain't me. It too slow. It can't show all the things that I be. So I want another rhythm that will free up me senses, break down defenses. Just take a look at them children dancing some other rhythm. That going rock to the bottom of me. Thank you.
Well, I see what your students are talking about. I'm ready to sign up right now. Our next reader is Nezar Alsayyad. He's a professor of architecture and planning. He also chairs the Center for Middle Eastern Studies. Currently, he also directs the International Association for the Study of Traditional Environments, as well as editing as well as editing its journal, Traditional Dwellings and Settlements Review. He's professionally active as both an architect and planner in the U.S. and in Egypt. His academic research is on architectural design and the urban history of the Third World. He has authored and edited 8 books, including Forms of Dominance, Cities and Caliphs, Consuming Tradition, Hybrid Urbanism, and Muslim Europe or Euro-Islam. His awards include the Bet al-Quran Gold Medal in Bahrain, the Pioneer American Society Book Award, and the American Institute of Architects Education Honors. When we talk about the brilliance and variety and depth of scholarship and inventive work in social change that goes on in Berkeley, this is who we're talking about. Please welcome him.
I'm going to read from Salah Jahin, Egypt's most distinguished vernacular poet of the modern era. Born in 1928, Jahin was also the political satirist of the then new Egyptian Republic, which came into existence following the 1952 revolution. He died in 1986. This is from his Rubaiyat, a rhyming poem fashioned after Omar Khayyam, but written in an Egyptian colloquial, often referred to as ZACK. I will read 8 verses in Arabic, and I will punctuate them with my own English translation, which was published a few years ago, in an attempt to convey the rhythm of this poem. عجبي عجبي عليك عجبي عليك يا زمن يا ابو البدع ينبكي عيني دما ازاي انا اختار لروحي طريق وانا اللي داخل في الحياة دي مرغما دخل الشتاء وقفل البيبان على البيوت وجعل شعاع الشمس خيط عنكبوت وحاجات كتير بتموت في ليل الشتاء لكن حاجات أكتر بترفض تموت. Amazed at thee time and still amazed am I. You make my heart blood cry. How is it that I can find for myself a way when I'm one who's entered this world without a say? When winter comes, all windows close and nothing is said except for a ray of sun from a spider's web as thin as a thread. Sure, in the night of winter, many things go dead, but many others survive and live without a dread. الضحك قال يسمع التكشير أمشير رطوبة وأنا ربيعي بشير مطرح ما بظهر بنتصر على العدم إن شاء الله أكون رسماية بالتبشير. دخل ربيع يضحك لقاني حزين نده ربيع على اسمي لم قلت مين حط ربيع أزهاره جنبي وراح وش تعمل الأزهار للميتين. Laughter said to sadness, why don't you cheer up? Winter will be gone and spring will soon come. Like chalk on a blackboard, you prevail in the total sum. Indeed, you will always win some, but also lose some. So spring entered laughing, but it found me sad. It called my name, I did not respond, nor was I glad. It placed its flowers beside me, like water and bread. But can roses revive those who are already dead? الدنيا من غير ربيع ميتة ورقة شجر ضعفانة ومفتفتة لا يا جدع تأمل وشوف ظهر الشتاء طالع في عز الشتاء. سمعت نقطة مية جوه المحيط بتقول لنقطة ما تنزليش في الغويط أخاف عليكي من الغرق. قلت أنا ده اللي يخاف من الوعد يبقى عبيط. Life is like a fallen leaf without the spring, cold and colorless, and who knows what it will bring. No, look carefully, my friend, and you will find that you are wrong, for a winter flower can only grow in a winter strong. I heard a drop of water inside the sea. Tell another drop, don't go in the deep. I'm scared you would drown with no retreat. So I wondered, mindless is he who is scared of fate. غمض عينيك وارقص بخفة ودلع. الدنيا هي الشابة وانت الجدع. تشوف رشاقة خطوتك تعبدك، لكن انت لو بصيت لرجليك تقع. انشد يا قلبي غنوتك للجمال، وارقص في صدري من اليمين للشمال. ماهوش بعيد تفضل لبكرة سعيد، ده كل يوم في ألف احتمال. عجبي. Dance around her with grace and pizzazz. Life is like an open heart in need of romance. She worships your elegant movement as you dance, but if you dare look at your own feet, you collapse. So sing your song to beauty my heart and dance in my chest from right to left. It is not impossible that tomorrow will keep you abreast, for every moment offers 1,000 possibilities ahead. عجبي. Thank you.
So much fun to get to hear your own translation. Our next reader, and then I'm going to turn the pleasure of introducing over to Zach, is John D. Barry. He is the Native American Studies librarian at UC Berkeley. He is a son, a husband, a father, an uncle, and a past president of the American Indian Library Association, a member of the Choctaw tribe. He does traditional stomp dancing. He's an Oklahoma native and a poet. He's published numerous poems himself. Please welcome John.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to bring you, hopefully, a couple of selections from Indian America. The first individual that I'm going to read is Carter Rivard. Carter Rivard was born in 1931 in the Osage Agency town of Pawhuska, Oklahoma. He grew up there, won a radio quiz show, and got a year's tuition to the University of Tulsa. So from there, and this is where it gets very interesting, he got a Rhodes Scholarship and received his bachelor's and his master's from Oxford and eventually his doctorate from Yale. He taught at Amherst and at Washington University, where he retired in 1997. In 1952, his Osage grandmother gave him what he says was his highest honor, which was an Osage naming ceremony. This poem is from his youth. It's called Getting Across. Hanging out under the bridge by fingertips and a toe, between ledge and girder, high over deep water, and thinking, I can't swim, unreachable by the older boys who've made it across. He watches the steel blue flashing of wings and chestnut bellies of barn swallows, shooting and swirling around him, below him, a 2-foot gar's black shadow in the green-brown water, and before he has weakened, lets the toe slip gently and swings down like a pendulum, hand over hand, along the girder to where the others perch on the concrete ledge, has kicked up his right leg onto the ledge and is pulled to safety, and can look back now at the swallow's easy curve upwards, its flutter and settling gently into the cup of feather-lined mud, there nestling on the shining girder's side where he has passed his death. The second one is from a woman named Patricia Phillips, and she's published a chapbook. I have some copies available if you're interested. See me afterwards. It's from Freddie Came Home and Other Coyote Tales. And Patty has also led a very interesting life. She's Delaware Apache and was a tech writer for NASA and has published literally hundreds of articles, feature news articles, all kinds of things. And this is her poem called Drunk in Oklahoma. Drunk in Oklahoma, a state that's hard to be sober in anyway. Erratic mind betraying itself in faded brown hills, gray-toothed gullies, splashes of man-dammed lakes, sullen dusty washes, insecurities, doubts reflected in men's eyes, their harsh vowels twanging off the taut nerves of work-worn women, suspicious, angered. It wasn't supposed to be this way, they thought, when they started out way back when. Sooners racing to drive a splintered stake in fertile soil, before the great dust bowl when the earth itself got up, slowly, painfully, and peeled its own flesh away, leaving bare the native heart ripped from the gnawed, gaunt bones of the land once called Indian territory, meaning slop bowl, trash dump, hell's own. Useless, they thought, so just right for a people no one wanted. Defeated, dirt-dragged remnants of once proud warriors, bartered and treaty battered, once free, now locked inside places bearing their ancient names on maps, not just of roads, but marking unseen fence, barbs retwisted daily by the dry hatred of those who came to take the last places of the people, not expecting that the land would brand them too with loss. Instead of conquering the red earth, ground them down until they dried up, growing stoop-shouldered, pot-bellied, squinting, angry at the government, that Cerebus they used to harry and slash the first peoples, not knowing that the vampire soon needs fresh prey. Now they stumble, fed upon, while the people still dance, some upright, some staggering with pain. Drunk or sober, they are still the first of this land, and that truth keeps them alive. With cheap wine, the sound of a lost coyote, singing my heart, I wait for another day, a new dawn when unseen voices will call me back to the heartbeat of a living people. Many tribes, still warriors, for now, in the darkness, sing me another swallow of life's bitter memories. I'll warm my cheeks with my own tears, and then I'll go on down the road. Looking for what, I don't know, not until I get there. On some day when Dawn Boy comes in shoes of yellow, and then I will dance, whirling with the wind, breathing the sky, touching the clouds, and then I won't be alone and drunk in Oklahoma anymore. Thank you.
Frederick Dolan has been on the faculty of the Department of Rhetoric since 1988. He's interested in quite a variety of topics, including the relationship of political theory to philosophical tradition, the nature of the political, modernity, hermeneutics. I've always wondered about hermeneutics. Afterwards, I want to talk to you about that. Aesthetics and the political dimensions of imaginative literature and American political theory and ideology. His course offerings have included a class on Heidegger and Wallace Stevens. That's how he fell into the glimpse of lunch poems. So, he is currently writing a book tentatively titled Worldliness and Wonder. Please welcome Frederick Dolan.
All right, well, in this class on Heidegger and Stevens, the idea was to Americanize Heidegger by means of the conceit that Stevens is our Hölderlin, but even more because Stevens' poetry often is about thought and puts thought on display in a kind of running philosophical commentary, and very often it deals with the failure of thinking to resolve its perplexities, and also the intensity of moments where the perplexities seem to drop away. So I've chosen just a few short ones. The first is called The Glass of Water. That the glass would melt in heat, that the water would freeze in cold, shows that this object is merely a state, one of many, between two poles. So in the metaphysical, there are these poles. Here in the center stands the glass, Light is the lion that comes down to drink. There, in that state, the glass is a pool. Ruddy are his eyes, and ruddy his claws when light comes down to wet his frothy jaws. And in the water, winding weeds move round. And there, and in another state, the refractions, the metaphysica, the plastic parts of poems crash in the mind. But fat Jocondus, worrying about what stands here in the center, not the glass, but in the center of our lives, this time, this day. It is a state, this spring among the politicians playing cards. In a village of the indigenes, one would have still to discover. Among the dogs and dung, one would continue to contend with one's ideas. Now here's a poem about truth called On the Road Home. It was when I said, "There's no such thing as the truth," that the grapes seemed fatter. The fox ran out of his hole. You said, "There are many truths, but they are not parts of a truth." Then the tree at night began to change, smoking through green and smoking blue. We were two figures in a wood. We said we stood alone. It was when I said, "Words are not forms of a single word. In the sum of the parts, there are only the parts. The world must be measured by I." It was when you said, "The idols have seen lots of poverty, snakes and gold and lice, but not the truth." It was at that time that the silence was largest and longest, the night was roundest, the fragrance of the autumn warmest, closest, and strongest. One more. Heidegger characterizes human beings as bethinged. We are the bethinged ones, and I think this is something of a gloss on that. It's called theory. I am what is around me. Women understand this. One is not a duchess 100 yards from a carriage. These, then, are portraits. A black vestibule, a high bed sheltered by curtains. These are merely instances. Thank you.
Our next reader is Elizabeth Dupuis, who has led the Instructional Services Unit of Doe and Moffat Library since May 2002. In 2000, she received the Innovation in Instruction Award from the Association of Colleges and Research Libraries for developing an interactive web-based instructional site freely available for adaptation through an open-source license. She currently serves on the advisory boards for the Western Cooperative for Educational Telecommunications and the Institute for Information Literacy. She also serves on the editorial board of the journal Research Strategies. Please welcome Elizabeth Dupuis.
I'm so excited to participate in this poetry reading since I'm new to Berkeley, and I know it's quite an honor, so trust me, I feel it in my heart. And when I was asked, then I felt this great weight about what I would choose to read, and I was sort of afraid I might choose something someone else would read who is speaking today, or something read last year. But it gave me an opportunity to ask a lot of my friends what their favorite poetry was, and I encourage you, if you haven't done this, to do this, because I've consumed so much poetry in the last 4 months. And the 3 short poems that I've picked today are from samples of all of those. The first is by Billy Collins, who was Poet Laureate in 2001, and most notable for me is his sense of humor and his twists in his poems. And this one's called Metamorphosis. If Kafka could turn a man into an insect in one sentence, perhaps he could transform me into something new. A slow, willful river running through a forest, or simply the German word for river, a handful of letters hidden in the dark alphabetical order of a dictionary. Not that I'm so miserable, but I could use a change of scenery and substance. Plus, the weather reminds me of him. I imagine Kafka at a desk, the nib of his pen, like the beak of a bird, disturbs the surface of a pool of ink, and he writes a sentence at the top of a page, changing me into a goldfish, or a lost mitten, or a cord of split wood, or the New York Public Library. To awaken one morning as the New York Public Library. I would pass the days observing old men in raincoats as they mounted the ponderous steps between the lions, carrying wild and scribbled notes inside their pockets. I would feel the pages of books turning inside me like butterflies. I would stare over Fifth Avenue with a perfectly straight face. A friend had recommended him to me, and she gave me a book called Sailing Alone Across the Room, which has a lot of interesting ones. It was hard for me to choose. The second is by Anna Akhmatova, who was a writer in the early 1900s, and she experienced a lot of government opposition and endured artistic repression and personal loss through the Stalin years. And the poem I chose is Lot's Wife. And the just man trailed God's shining agent over a black mountain in his giant track, while a restless voice kept harrowing his woman. It's not too late. You can still look back at the red towers of your native Sodom, the square where once you sang, the spinning shed, at the empty windows set in the tall house where sons and daughters blessed your marriage bed. A single glance, a sudden dart of pain stitching her eyes before she made a sound. Her body flaked into transparent salt, and her swift legs rooted to the ground. Who will grieve for this woman? Does she not seem too insignificant for our concern? Yet in my heart, I will never deny her, who suffered death because she chose to turn. And the third and final one is by Yuan Mai, who was a Chinese poet in the 1700s, who wrote a type of literature called note form, which is known for its brevity, which I'm sure will be appreciated, and its clarity. And this one's titled, They Mock Me for Planting Trees at My Age. 70, and still planting trees. Don't laugh at me, my friends. Of course, I know I'm going to die. I also know I'm not dead yet.
The next reader is Lifchez, who's a practicing architect who joined the Faculty of Architecture in 1972. His abiding interest in teaching in his creative work are the uses of architecture by marginal populations living productive lives within the mainstream of society. His most recent book is The Dervish Lodge, Architecture, Art, and Sufism in Ottoman Turkey. He's the founder and chair of the Berkeley Prize, an international essay competition for undergraduate students of architecture dedicated to the proposition that architecture is a social art. Please welcome Professor Lifchez.
This is awesome. I'm going to read a piece from Michael Ondaatje's Running in the Family. Ondaatje doesn't read my introduction. Why I like this piece is he returned to Sri Lanka or Ceylon, where his family had lived forever. And Running in the Family is a memoir of very short pieces, images. And in the middle of the book, there are some poems. And there's one called High Flower, which I feel comes the closest to the experience of the indigenous people than any other part of the book. High flowers. The slow moving of her cotton in the heat. Hard shell of foot. She chops the yellow coconut, the color of Anuradhapura stone. The woman my ancestors ignored sits at the doorway chopping coconut, cleaning rice. Her husband moves in the air between trees, the curved knife at his hip in high shadows of coconut palms. He grasps a path of rope above his head and below him with his naked foot. He drinks the first sweet mouthful from the cut flower, then drains it into a narrow-necked pot and steps out to the next tree. Above the small roads of Watala, Kalutara, the toady tapper, walks, collecting the white liquid for tavern vats. Down here, the light storms through branches and boils the street. Villagers stand in the shadow and drink the fluid from a coned leaf. He works fast to reach his quota before the maniac monsoon. The shape of knife and pot do not vary from the 18th century museum prints. In the village, a woman shuffles rice in a cane mat. Grit and husk separate, are thrown to the sun. From his darkness among high flowers to this room contained by mud walls, everything that is important occurs in shadow. Her discreet moving, his dreams of walking from tree to tree without ropes. It is not vanity which allows him this freedom, but skill and habit, the curved knife his father gave him. It is the coolness up there, for the ground heat has not yet risen, which makes him forget necessity. Kings, fortresses, traffic and open sun. Within a doorway, the woman turns in the old pleasure of darkness. In the high trees above her, shadows eliminate the path he moves along.
Over 6,300 Berkeley students have learned economic history, consumer credit issues, and macroeconomic theory from our next reader, Bay Area native Martha Olney. She joined the Berkeley faculty in 1992. Professor Olney is the author of Buy Now, Pay Later, Advertising, Credit, and Consumer Durables in the 1920s, a seminal work on the topic. She and her partner, the Reverend Esther Hargis, are the mothers of a 5-year-old son. Please welcome Professor Olney.
Thank you very much. I have to confess that I'm not a poet and I'm not skilled at poetry, and I'm not here for having anything to do with poetry. I'm here, I think, because I received the Distinguished Teaching Award last spring, and thank you. So I think that put me on the short list. And then the so-called essay that I was to write that was supposed to be a teaching in my teaching statement of my teaching philosophy was somewhere in between, I think, poetry and prose, and was nowhere near an essay. And so I suspect that was the other thing that put me on. I said to a friend today that I'm very glad this is not an agricultural campus, or having won the Distinguished Teaching Award would have me right now at a cow milking contest with equal knowledge and ability. When I was an undergraduate, I took poetry for physicists, which was the complementary class to physics for poets. So what can I say? We had all summer to think about what we would read, and the poem that kept coming back to me was Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. We memorized this in 7th grade and had to stand up, of course, and read it in 7th grade. And a few weeks ago, when I went and dug out the book from the bookshelf, being a professor, of course, I have shelves and shelves and shelves of books, and still have the book. And I opened it up, and it says, Merry Christmas to Marty from Rich, 1968. So this was the book that my brother, who was in the Army at the time, gave to me for Christmas during my 8th grade year. So not only did it stick with me, but I must have liked it so much that my mother, who surely did my brother's Christmas shopping that year, went out and bought it for me. I like this poem, and it stuck with me because I feel like there have been many opportunities and choices in my life where I've taken the road not taken. that I majored in mathematics and was the only girl in my mathematics courses, that I got a PhD in economics when very few women were getting PhDs in economics, that my partner is female and we've been together 20 years at a time when that was just not something that people did as much, or at least they didn't talk about it. We have a son. There's many things that we've done, that I've done, that were taking the road not taken, and it has made all the difference. So let me share with you Robert Frost, and then I have a second poem after that. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one last traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Second poem I wanted to share with you today, for those of you who did read that very odd statement of teaching philosophy that I wrote last year, I talked in there about the last day of class in the spring 2002, which was the day that my uncle passed away, and he was a widower with no children, and I was one of his primary caretakers, and so I had spent the previous 4 nights in a nursing home holding his hand through the dying process. His wife, my Auntie Ruth, had passed away in May of 1998, and she had not had a long disease. She had been at her choir chorus, San Leandro retired teachers chorus rehearsal, and had collapsed and then was dead 3 days later. She and Uncle David were both Cal alums. They loved Cal, and they were very proud of me, their niece, and they were very proud of anybody in the family who says Go Bears, and we all say Go Bears. I have to say my 5-and-a-half-year-old, who's a kindergartner, had friends over after school yesterday, and I was out in the other room doing something, and I could hear them in his room, and he was going, "Give me a C! Give me an A! Give me an L! What's that cell?" And he was getting the... Anyway, so we're good Go Bears people. When my Auntie Ruth died, in May of 1998, I was, my partner and I were pretty much in charge of helping my uncle to come up with funeral arrangements. And there was a moment when I was in their house. It's a house that had burned down in the big fire and been rebuilt. And my partner and my uncle had gone off to the cemetery to make the arrangements. And we knew that what we wanted was, we wanted to have a picture of my aunt, and you can, this is the picture of my aunt. We wanted to have a picture of my aunt with a poem on the back that we were going to distribute to everybody at the services. And I was just stumped to come up with a poem. And I was alone in the house, and I went out on they had a house up in the hills where the fire was, and I went out on the deck and looked at this expansive view and talked to my aunt. And, you know, Auntie Ruth, what am I supposed to do? What do you want for this poem? And she was dead by then. I got that part. And I turned and I went back into the house, and something made me stop and take down this book of poetry and open it up. And this is the poem that the book opened to. And I think my aunt told me this is what she wanted. The poem is called Farewell. Tell them, O skyborn, when I die with high romance to wife, that I went out as I had lived, drunk with the joy of life. Yea, say that I went down to death, serene and unafraid, still loving song, but loving more life, of which song is made. It's by Harry Kemp. Thank you very much.
I was talking with our next reader, Christos Papadimitriou, right before the reading. He said he was going to read 3 poems by Greek poets, and I said, will you read one in Greek? And he said, well, I didn't bring it. And I said, well, that's too bad. And he said, well, we are in the library. So, like a good researcher, he ran downstairs, and he's going to treat us to that. He teaches in the computer science department. He's interested in the theory of algorithms and complexity and its applications to databases, optimization, AI, and game theory. He's written several books on computing, including Computational Complexity. He's also the author of a soon-to-be-published book called Turing, a novel about computation from MIT Press. Please welcome him.
Thank you. Hello. I'm going to read you 3 Greek poems. The common thread is that idea of the ancients that the gods like to mingle with the mortals and toy with them. So the first is from the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, Fagle's translation, Book 16. 3 times Patroclus charged the jet of the high wall. 3 times Apollo battered the man and hurled him back, the god's immortal hands beating down on the gleaming shield. Then, at Patroclus' 4th assault, like something superhuman, the god shrieked down his winging words of terror. Back, Patroclus, prince, go back. It's not the will of fate that the proud Trojan citadel fall before your spear, not even before Achilles, far greater man than you. As you know, Patroclus did not go back, and he was instead killed by Hector, and then, of course, the plot thickens. Okay, so the other 2 poems are by contemporary Greek, by 20th century Greek poets, 2 great ones, Kavafis and Seferis. They're both wonderful translations by Keeley and Sherard. So you get both great lyrical English and the Greek accent. So, so Kavafis wrote 2 kinds of poems, either subtle historical allegory or poems of unsubtle eroticism. So you decide which of the 2 this. Yeah. When he moved through the marketplace of Seleucia, just as it was getting dark, moved like a young man, tall, extremely handsome, with the joy of being immortal in his eyes, with his black and perfumed hair, the people going by would gaze at him, and one would ask the other if he knew him, if he was a Greek from Syria or a stranger. But some who looked more carefully would understand and step aside. And as he disappeared under the arcades, among the shadows and the evening lights, going toward the quarter that lives only at night, with orgies and debauchery, with every kind of intoxication and desire, they would wonder which of them it could be, and for what suspicious pleasure he had come down into the streets of Seleucia from the august celestial mansions. So this is the poem that I found also in Greek, and I want to read you a couple of lines. I wonder if you can hear the sort of, the ring of Kavafi Greek. It's extremely idiomatic Greek. The man was actually born in Alexandria and raised, but he's deliberately idiomatic way beyond that. Όταν κανένας τον περνούσε από τις Ελευκίες την αγορά, περί την ώρα που βραδιάζει, σαν υψηλός και τέλεια ωραίος έφηβος, με τη χαρά της αυθαρσίας μες στα μάτια, με τα αρωματισμένα μαύρα του μαλλιά, οι διαβάτες τον εκοίταζαν και ο ένας τον άλλον ρωτούσαν αν το γνώριζε και αν ήταν Έλληνη της Συρίας ή ξένος. The last poem is by George Seferis, another great poet. This one is a poem of divine deception. Here goes. Lyric. As you know, the reason why Patroclus died in Troy was because he believed that the Trojans were holding Helen, the queen of Sparta. So listen. Lyric nightingale. On a night like this, by the shore of Proteus, the Spartan slave girls heard you and began their lament. And among them, who would have believed it? Helen, she whom we hunted so many years by the banks of the Scamander. She was there at the desert's lip. I touched her. She spoke to me. It isn't true, she cried. I didn't board the blue-bowed ship. I never went to valiant Troy. Breasts girded high, the sun in her hair, and that stature, shadows and smiles everywhere, on shoulders, thighs, and knees, the skin alive, and her eyes with the large eyelids. She was there, on the banks of a delta. And at Troy, nothing. Just a phantom image, an empty tunic. The gods wanted it so. So may the gods bring poetry to your semester. Thank you very much.
I always find it fascinating that when you pick 25 poems seemingly at random, there are always coincidences, and I just noticed that the 2 poems that were read in the original language today were both written in Egypt. Pablo Spiller is the Joe Shung Professor of International Business and Public Policy in the Haas School of Business. He also chairs the Haas Business and Public Policy Group. Among his many interests are industrial organization, political economy, regulatory issues in developing countries, and the role of institutions in society. He's a consultant for many institutions, including the Inter-American Development Bank, the Federal Trade Commission, and the United Nations Development Program. Please welcome Pablo Spiller.
Well, when I got the email about doing this, I thought, how did they know that I write tangos? And I thought, well, maybe this will be a great opportunity to inflict on this audience my so far unread, except for one, and unplayed tangos. But I decided I'm not ready to come out of the closet, and instead I thought, why don't I talk and read something about a poet who is very close to me. I'm sorry, I'm having this cold that it's not my normal self. This poet is Silvia Baron Supervielle, and she's very important to me for several reasons. One, she's the oldest sister of my partner. Second, I spent with her a whole month this summer in Paris before it became too hot. And third, she, like me, is an exiled and intellectual exile. And as me, have felt the difficulties of adapting to a foreign environment, and somehow we managed to leave home and not yet reach here. And that gave us, to me at least, an amazing connection to Silvia. Now, Silvia's poems, and there is a book here that I saw of her, are really abstract and very short. As an abstract painter, we say, it's your job to figure out what I mean. And it's really the same thing here with Silvia. You have to think and feel what she's saying. Is not always so obvious, but the music that she puts in her poems is what at least I grasp, and I can feel that better than the understanding sometimes. She is the only Argentine, well, I should say she's Argentine. She left Argentina at the early age of 20 plus, kind of 40 years ago. And she is now a member of the French Academy, and she writes in French. Now, I thought I'll read you in English. We discussed with Silvia which poems to read, since they're very short. I'll read you 4. And as you will see, they reflect both her current existence in her tiny 45 square meter apartment in Ile Saint Louis, which she has lived for 40 years, overlooking the Seine, and also her loss, of her mother, in her country, and actually because her mother was from Uruguay, she actually feels as if she lost Uruguay as well, which is my country. So just time. Just time to glimpse the table, to turn towards the balcony, the trees, the river, before my gaze erases them. The next poem is called Give Me Back. Give me back the difference between sun and rain, my vast solitude in which I could run about. Give me back the sky, the hours, the years, a window. Now her tiny apartment is that window, actually. Between space and earth, voice and void, word and wind of the unfinished echo. And as my tango professor says, you have always leave the best song for last. Here comes a wonderful, slightly longer poem. It's called Nobody Calling Now, which I adjusted the translation as I thought it was not, and she agrees. So, nobody nor lost fire calling now to come, windless in the forest, nor branches awaiting the unrevealed season. The salvos of breaking waves announce but the sea, and on the line lightning flash designates but shadow. No dusk pours down its tattered golden face. From this sky to another, no enigma breaks the pact of resistance to signs and sounds. Thank you.
Our last reader is Steve Tollefson, another winner of the campus's Distinguished Teaching Award. He's taught at Berkeley for 27 years. He's the author of 4 books on writing and grammar, including Grammar Grams. He's no stranger to the Morrison Library. He hosts the Berkeley Writers at Work series in this room. Please welcome him.
Knowing a lot about the Berkeley faculty and staff, I knew I should pick a haiku if I was going to be the last reader. But I'm sorry I couldn't. 2 poems. I will cut down on the introduction. Robinson Jeffers, Bay Area poet. This is a poem from 1925 that I think we might all learn from today. Shine, Perishing Republic. While this America settles in the mold of its vulgarity, heavily thickening to empire, and protest, only a bubble in the molten mass, pops and sighs out, and the mass hardens. I sadly smiling remember that the flower fades to make fruit. The fruit rots to make earth. Out of the mother and through the spring exultances, ripeness and decadence, and home to the mother. You making haste on decay, not blameworthy. Life is good, be it stubbornly long or suddenly immortal splendor. Meteors are not needed less than mountains. Shine, Perishing Republic. But for my children, I would have them keep their distance from the thickening center. Corruption never has been compulsory. When the cities lie at the monster's feet, there are left the mountains. And boys, be nothing so moderate as in love of man, a clever servant, insufferable master. That is the trap that catches the noblest spirits, that caught, they say, God when he walked the earth. And then quickly, The Power of the Internet. The next poem is A Girl Writing a Letter by William Carpenter, who is a poet and teaches on the East Coast, but I believe this is probably the most commonly sent around poem on the internet. It's hard to find his books, but you can find this wonderful poem. I haven't yet figured out where to put the pause in it because it gets faster as you read along, and so at some point I will start huffing and puffing and run out of breath. A thief drives to the museum in his black van. The night watchman says, "Sorry, closed, you have to come back tomorrow." The thief sticks the point of his knife in the guard's ear. "I haven't got all evening," he says. "I need some art." "Art is for pleasure," the guard says, "not possession. You can't something," and then the duct tape is going across his mouth. "Don't worry," the thief says, "we're both on the same side." He finds the Dutch masters and goes right for a Vermeer, girl writing a letter. The thief knows what he's doing. He has a PhD. He slices the canvas on one edge from the shelf holding the salad bowls right down to the square of sunlight on the black and white checked floor. The girl doesn't hear this. She's too absorbed in writing her letter, and she doesn't notice him until it's too late. He's in the picture. He's already seated at the harpsichord. He's playing the G minor sonata by Domenico Scarlatti, which once made her heart beat until it passed the harpsichord and raced ahead and waited for the music to catch up. She's worked on this letter for 320 years. Now a man's here, and though he's dressed in some weird clothes, he's playing the harpsichord for her alone. There's no one else alive in the museum. The man she was writing to is dead. Time to stop thinking about him. The artist who painted her is dead. She should be dead herself, only she has an ear for music and a heart that's running up the staircase of the Gardner Museum with a man she's only known for a few minutes. But it's true, it feels like her whole life. So when the thief hands her the knife and says, "You slice the paintings out of their frames, you roll them up," she does it. And when he says, "You put another strip of duct tape over the guard's mouth so he'll stop talking about aesthetics," she tapes him. And when the thief puts her behind the wheel and says, "Drive, baby, the night is ours," it is the girl writing a letter who steers the black van onto the westbound ramp for Storrow Drive, and then onto the Massachusetts Turnpike. It's the girl writing a letter who drives 80 miles an hour headed west into a country that's not even discovered yet, with a known criminal, a van full of old masters, and nowhere to go but down. But for the girl writing a letter, these things don't matter. She's got a beer in her free hand, she's on the road, she's real, and she's in love.